Hey there, it's Tess and Christina. We're the co-hosts of Authentically Wild, a podcast that's here to shake up how you see life, relationships, and your healing journey.
This isn't your typical feel-good chatter. We're diving headfirst into the raw, real, and transformative conversations that can change everything you thought you knew about yourself and the life you're currently living.
Pulling back the curtain on our day-to-day lives, talking about relationships, parenthood, personal growth, trauma, and spirituality. Both of us have transitioned from lives that felt stuck and inauthentic to discovering a way of living that's raw, honest, and deeply healing.
The breakthroughs that we've had, they've been wild, and they're exactly why this podcast exists. We knew we couldn't keep these conversations to ourselves.
So if you felt lost, stuck, or like there's something more out there for you, this is your sign.
It's in the hardest, messiest seasons of life that we discover our truest selves. But here's the thing, the choice to dig in, that's all yours, baby.
So buckle up,
because shit's about to get wild.
This is going to be such a great episode.
Oh, man, I hope you all are ready.
We have entitled this episode of the Authentically Wild podcast, Your Relationship Should Trigger You. If that title triggers you, you should probably keep listening.
Oh, man. I hope y'all are ready to dive in because Tess and I have been talking about all the things lately, of course. And one thing we've really been talking about is our relationships with our partners. And
do we ever stop talking about those, by the way?
No, we really don't.
Okay.
And we just have so many things to say, so much so that we might just make this a bit of a series. And
yes.
Yeah, and come back and talk about some other pieces next week.
So this is part one, all around. We're going to dive into what the purpose of intimate partnership or relationship actually is. We're going to talk about why it's good to be triggered by your partner and what some of those emotions can be to notice that you're triggered and what the root meaning of those actually is. Obviously, we're going to dive into our personal experience because it wouldn't be this podcast if we didn't do that. And then we're going to give you some action steps, sort of some homework maybe you can take home for the rest of the week. And a lot of this topic is going to be on the concept of enmeshment. And so if you're not familiar with that, definitely stay tuned to get a breakdown of what that is.
Yeah, and I want to say too, just to preface, if there's one thing that I'm learning continually right now, especially right now with where I'm at in my relationship with Derek on the path, is that I don't have any of this figured out. Like if anything, what I thought, and it's funny because I sent you that video today around conscious relationships, what I thought a conscious relationship was, and I remember you always saying like, just you wait, girl, just you wait. And, now that I'm in it, there are some very, very challenging moments and experiences and phases. But then there also gets to be these really beautiful, intimate moments that you couldn't actually have without the contrast.
Absolutely. And that's, I think in part two of this, we're really going to dive into the different types of relationships because not everyone is here in this experience to have this grandiose, conscious relationship. And when we say conscious relationship, the whole point of that is our souls, if you believe this, our souls came here to expand, to grow, to evolve. There is no better place for this to happen than in the petri dish. I say that because it literally feels like an experiment sometimes of your intimate partnership, right? That's who you spend the most time with. It's who you're going to get into everyday squabbles about. You're going to see the patterns, their beliefs that, a lot of people don't walk around showing that part of themselves to the everyday world, to your coworkers, your friends, even your family. Intimate partnership shows parts of us, the whole being of who we are. And so it's only natural that these would be our biggest opportunities for mirroring and growth.
Yeah, it's that saying, intimacy, into me you see. And we're truly shown this. We're given this opportunity in our relationships. And spoiler alert, if you didn't realize yet, and we've said it many times, is these romantic relationships that we find ourselves in, on such a deeper level represent our bonds and attachments with our parents. So there's a reason why you get so triggered. And that's going to be the first piece we go into here is what do these triggers mean in the relationships? Like when something shows up for you in your relationship. And when I say trigger, I really want you to be thinking about a strong emotional response that you have to something. And it's really important to explore this piece of triggers first, because when we go down the path in this episode of enmeshment, disgust, resent, like it's important to understand why that's showing up. If you take it at face value, I mean, my personal opinion is you're not going to get anywhere. You got to get into this. Like, why do you get as triggered as you do in relationships? And it's going to be different for each person.
This concept of that our external reality is always a mirror reflecting back our traumas, our biggest fears, our biggest doubts. So of course, like what you said, we would create into our reality a partner who can mirror that back to us, right? That's the whole point of this. And that's not to mean that these relationships shouldn't have this beautiful love or this amazing playfulness or joy. But if you find yourself like, oh, we're always in it with these patterns or these things, that's because there's a service there that's happening for your soul's growth and evolution. And, I think the other piece you really touch on there is that if we are not willing to meet the trigger, if we're not willing to go and look at and have the awareness of why do I feel like that? Because I'll be the first to say I didn't used to be like that. I didn't know all of this stuff. I would just project. You are making me mad. You are doing this wrong. You are not being considerate or whatever it might be to my partner, right? Rather than being like, pause. Why am I feeling like this? And it's not to say that the other partner doesn't have some responsibility or needs to take accountability for something in that triggering dynamic, but I'm willing to bet a lot of listeners, probably their first instinct isn't to say, why do I feel this way? What is this showing me about something inside of me?
Yeah, and as you're saying that, it's also making me reflect on my own journey. I started to think, when did this shift for me? And this was actually in when I became a mom, because Max was having so many challenges and I was doing all the external searching. Oh, how do I fix this? What do I have to do to help him? And then I realized at some point, this is a me problem. Like, oh, I got to actually look at something in here. And then it started to shift how I viewed the romantic relationships in my life, right? But often I think sometimes we have to get to this place of pain, or get to this place of I'm so done with this. I'm so done feeling this pain or this stuckness, that something has to shift. And the shift, I'm going to bet, often always is within ourselves, because like you said, this thing is showing up, this mirror that your partner is holding is representing these patterns within you that need to shift. And this isn't to say they don't also play a role here. They're not being asked of something also. And we're going to get into why then it's important for both of us to do the work. But truly, it becomes your job to go within yourself and figure out, why is this showing up? Why am I getting so triggered? What's the pattern I'm creating here? And when you can start to see your patterns, which, again, spoiler alert, started in childhood, that's where you start to find some shifts, some freedom.
Right. The whole point too of what we're trying to get across in this episode is not that triggers or conflict or the healing of these old wounds most of the time is bad. I think where there becomes a problem is when maybe there's only one partner who is curious and wants to meet the trigger. So imagine yourself standing across from your partner. And that middle void space, that's where the triggers are. You both have to meet them. What does this say about me? What does this say about you? How can we resolve this? How can we work through this? How can I approach this differently next time? What sorts of healing do I need to do, or reprogramming? And then it begins to have less of an edge. And then another thing will pop up, because that's the whole point. Where I would just want listeners to also consider is, if you feel you're in this relationship, but you're the only one consciously approaching it. So are you the only one who is taking taking any accountability, looking in the mirror at why you're feeling this way. If your partner is not, I don't want it to come across in this episode that you can force anyone to change, because people cannot change the parts of themselves that they are not willing to shine a light on. And I will emphasize also that if there are parts of people, the hardest part for them to change will be the parts of themselves, the patterns, behaviors that they rely on for safety and for a sense of self. And they may be unaware of how attached they are to those beliefs, patterns, or behaviors, because usually they stem from so long ago. So if you're in that type of dynamic, know that something's going to have to change on that side of that partner in order to come to the places Christina and I are talking about here, which is really this evolution and this sort of joint duo healing that does happen in conscious partnership.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you bring up that piece, because if we were to look at when a trigger shows up from an energetic perspective, right? You have this trigger that shows up in your relationship. You got really triggered by something. That then is your indicator that something is showing up within you. There's something deeper here that's asking to be looked at, that's probably asking to be healed, but it doesn't stop there. We can't heal this alone in relationship, because guess what? Your partner plays a role in that dance, right? Your partner brings their energy in, their actions to that trigger. And so if they're not doing the work, looking at their stuff in that, they will then continue to do that. And so there's only a partial healing that's occurring in that energy. So important.
Because I mean, so many people ask this question, like, is there a soulmate for everyone? I think I told you this a few weeks ago, but Jay Shetty, I saw him on a podcast a few weeks ago, and he said, I think there's three. So I was like intrigued. Ooh, which type of soulmate do I have right now? And the first was the firecracker. It's over and done with before it even starts, in a way. It's like fast, intense love, right? Everyone knows
Catalyst.
who that was. Yeah. Ooh, like gone in a flash of a pan. And there's the candle. It's like slow burning. But sometimes, maybe it's boring or it doesn't activate enough in you. Maybe there's no alignment. And so you kind of put it out before it's even done burning, right? We all know we've been in a relationship like that. And then there's the mirror. And that is what we're talking about today. And so Jay Shetty says that is the relationship that I would want to stay in, because that is where the most growth happens. So really, this is a conversation about who do you want to do the work with? Because Christine and I can be firsthand accounts. It never ends. It's not to say that there's not beautiful parts, but if you're in a relationship thinking the grass is greener or there's someone else, if your partner is meeting you, if they are willing to do that healing, there's more to learn there, right? There's more growth to happen.
Yeah, I'm kind of having an aha moment as we're talking here, because, Derek and I are coming up to a year being together. Feels like a long time, actually.
It's also how you know.
Right.
It feels like 40 years.
Maybe 40 lifetimes. And I think the aha moment I'm having is, I think there's a part of me that was like still expecting it to kind of get smooth. And I actually don't think that is the intention of our container. I don't sure, we're going to have maybe some moments and maybe a phase here or there where it's a bit smoother. But I actually think that our souls signed up for it to be this contrasting, because we're meant to learn and grow and expand so much together. And there's this piece around acceptance. Where, as I'm reflecting within myself, where might you be resisting or fighting what is being asked of you in this container? Just something to think about.
Yes. Because I agree with you. It feels like a rocky, turbulent boat on some ocean with tidal waves sometimes. However, I think it's all about our mindset too, right? If we can see when these parts of us pop up that this is an opportunity for me to get curious and for me to grow and learn something, that's what this whole adventure is really about. It feels less overpowering, right? It feels smoother. I think there's a way that we can get there, especially if you're in a conscious relationship where it just doesn't seem to stop. You have to almost think of it like, okay, we're in this game and we are getting up in the levels. Like, we are just going for it.
Yeah. And so maybe that's where we want to get, but let's back up here a little bit, because we all know that feeling when we are triggered, right? And we're going to dig into some some emotional experiences here. We're going to dig into disgust as one of the bigger triggers you might experience in your relationship, or maybe there's some resent there. And we're going to explore this a little bit because, when we're in it, there's a lot showing up from a nervous system perspective, right? When you're having these really strong emotional responses, and we're going to take the example of disgust because this is a big one that I have been exploring. I know, Tess, you've been exploring it as well. Like, what does that mean when you have disgust or resent that starts to show up in your relationship? And here's the thing, we could choose to take this at face value. Ugh, what that person is doing, what my partner is doing is gross, yuck, get away. And you might do that because disgust can be such a strong, visceral
Mm-hmm.
response when it's coming up, but there's a reason for this. Okay. And I want you to get curious as we're exploring this. When disgust shows up, and this is something I've really explored from a somatic lens because it is a strong one that has shown up for me. When you have disgust showing up, there is a reason it feels so strong. It is, if we look at it on an energetic level, it creates a repelling. It creates a pushing away of that piece to protect you. Because when we dig into this on a deeper level, right, everything starts with childhood. And when disgust shows up, this is always an indicator that there is a younger part of you showing up, that there is a young energy showing up. When disgust shows up, this is indicating on a deeper level that in some way the energy you're experiencing now doesn't feel safe. And if you think about this, if we're pushing it away, if there's an energy within us that's needing to repel it, there's a boundary that's being needed in this moment where in the past you weren't able to feel space from that energy that feels familiar now. And so this repelling, this disgust allows you to feel apart from that energy rather than it feeling a part of you.
Mm-hmm. As you're saying that, I'm literally thinking of how enmeshed that means we are. Like when we have that disgust, because as Christina just said there, when disgust shows up, there's a younger part at play. There's a younger part that is fighting for survival. Whatever this does not feel safe. Typically, those dynamics where there is no boundary come in early childhood, where maybe a parent couldn't establish an emotional boundary with you. Maybe you were responsible for taking on their emotions. Maybe you were given too much pressure and you felt reliant on other people, like you and them had to become one in a way. So when you feel this disgust show up, it's because whatever is happening with your partner feels like a literal attack on your survival. And I bring up the enmeshment part because a lot of people conflate that with codependency. That's just being dependent on someone maybe to soothe you or to calm you. Enmeshment almost means like you and I are one. So anything happening to you, like especially if it triggers something in me, I need to control it immediately. Like our firefighters, if you're familiar with parts work, are going to come up right away. This isn't something we can wait on. That's why disgust, I think, feels so visceral. It is a get this away from me now.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to me because I think I said this to you in a voice note recently too. When we think about the movie Inside Out, disgust is portrayed as one of the primal emotions. And I think this is amazing. It should be, but there should also be an explanation of why. I think some people just think, oh, disgust is there, like whatever. No, when we think about this, disgust creates a boundary. And these
Mm-hmm.
are the boundaries so if disgust is showing up, this shows actually a very intelligent part of your system that is coming online, being like, there is no separation from that unsafe thing and me. And oh my goodness, how important is this? So this is where we really want to get curious with disgust if it's showing up. If you go within yourself, and this is where it's so important to be able to take this space to figure out what's showing up. Because I'm telling you right now, if disgust is showing up, there is a trauma there. And I'm not trying to be
Yeah.
dramatic saying this, but truly, because it is such a strong, visceral experience and it allows us to, or it's wanting us to really repel that piece, that is always indicating that there is some deep energy here that wants to be healed from that piece that's showing up in your current reality.
Chef's kiss.
Mm. And before we continue on, something I want to riff here with you for a sec, because something that it's making me think of is on social media, there's like sometimes this funny trend to talk about the ick in our partner. Like, oh, my partner does
Mm,
this or does this. I feel like the ick is also kind of related to this in a way.
100%.
It's not as strong as disgust, right? Like where disgust can be like, oh, but there is that energy there.
And I think a lot of people consider the ick maybe when they're first dating someone, and maybe that is a red flag for you, right? Like, we're not saying, oh, even if you feel that, go ahead and date them. No, I think it's probably a mirror for yourself to be like, what is it about that feels unsafe to me? And that's just something to add to your pros and cons list. But I think also when we take it a step further, when you're already in a container with someone, you're years in, and some feeling of disgust begins to come up, maybe around a change in your lives or your relationship or something they've done, that's when we got to really go inward to ourselves, right? But yeah, I do love it. It's almost a precursor to what you could feel in that relationship.
Yeah, or it makes me think of like we should do a piece of like what the ick means about your trauma.
And it's not just physical, right? Like we're not talking about ick or disgust because like I didn't love his hair today. No. We're talking about some disagreement trigger that happens, and this repulsion begins to just creep up into like your jugular because you can't override disgust.
Mm-mm.
Or really the ick, to be honest. That's why those memes are like, once you get the ick, you're done, right? There's no going back. It's such a forceful protector. And so that actually signals that the wound's pretty deep. It's a deep one.
It's a deep one. And what do we do with those? We dig in, baby.
That's right. Well, before I think we're going to jump to some personal experiences just so you can understand, how might I see this? How might I work through this in my relationship? But before we do that, just another piece we want to touch on here is just this concept of enmeshment, because I think this is one of the reasons, sort of the tethers to discuss why it's so critical to look at this. So think of enmeshment again, where there's no boundaries when you're a childhood. So maybe you were like your parents' therapist. Maybe you felt that you had to take on their emotions. Maybe there was some hypervigilance there to protect your safety. So you're always, imagine yourself sitting across the table. And here's a good example of how you can know when you're enmeshed with someone, especially an intimate partner. Christina says, I want to do the podcast on Thursdays at 8 a.m. And like, that just doesn't work for me. And then I say, hey, Christina, you know what? 8 a.m. doesn't work for me. Can we stick to 12? And then she gets upset. And then I feel really guilty. So a lot of the times when we are enmeshed, and I'm not saying Christina and I are enmeshed, I'm just giving this as an example, we will feel guilt or some sort of shame for feeling the way that we do because we think that but really guilt is an emotion that comes up when we've actually done something wrong. So in that scenario, have I actually done something wrong? No. What I have done though is I've reached across the screen in this case or the table and I've taken on that emotion, that reaction that Christina's having, and I've put that into my body because I can't separate her emotions from my own. Does that make sense? And so think about, especially when we talk about disgust and this lack of boundaries when we're growing up, you will find yourself in behaviors, in beliefs like this. So maybe my partner says something and all of a sudden, or I say something to my partner about how they're making me feel, having this conscious conversation. And then I am overwhelmed with guilt because they're not taking it well, or they get really upset at what I'm saying. That's actually not guilt. That is a pattern of enmeshment, right? And so I think it's just really important to understand that concept. It's not I'm codependent on them. Codependency is a different thing. Enmeshment means on a nervous system level, I feel we are one and the same. And so your reactions, your emotions, your experience are now mine, and I have to carry them. And that is a learned behavior and one that is really something you need to look at, especially in this container of conscious relationship, because you can't meet the triggers. You can't meet those conversations with your partner if you can't separate their emotional experience from your own.
I mean, dang, this podcast is always so healing for me because now I'm even just thinking about like a conversation I want to have with Derek, and I wasn't going to have it before. And now I'm like, oh, no, yeah, it's important that I have this conversation because maybe I felt a little bit guilty, right?
But that's because, and again, we all have, I think, some level
yeah.
of enmeshment, probably if you're like a 90s child. And
Oh my God.
anyways,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
raised in those same dynamics. But it's so important because it actually prevents you from being able to say the things, to having those conversations around the triggers, from understanding disgust when you are enmeshed with it. Because and again, I always say this, honesty without kindness is just cruelty. So it doesn't mean that you need to approach those conversations with care and with empathy and think about how that person feels. But if they react regardless, because we're all still learning, even in a conscious relationship, even if that person is willing to meet you in those triggers, it doesn't mean they're going to not like go off sometimes. Like I still do, but I can recognize, well, I'm dysregulated. I need to calm my nervous system down. It's not Tori's job to hold my emotions. He can just be there while I have them. And then I can come back to the table again to have this conversation. But if he were to take on my emotion and then feel guilty and then say, okay, never mind. Like, I'm sorry, I said that, blah, 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 blah. Now we're enmeshed. His emotions are not separate from mine.
Yeah, and when you were talking about the piece with guilt, one thing that I've gotten in the habit of working with clients with when guilt comes up is asking them below that guilt, because I've noticed a pattern when guilt shows up. Below that guilt, what do you not feel in control of? And often we will take that guilt on to feel more in control of what feels uncontrollable, which is obviously that other person's experience.
1000. And that's because a lot of the times in childhood, we were responsible for those emotions,
Ugh.
that reactivity. And depending on your relationships with your primary caregiver, it probably kept you safe to some regard, right? And so then we continue that pattern in our adulthood, which is why it's just so important for us to look at this stuff.
Hi, my friends. We're going to pause here for a moment and just let you know if you're needing deeper support on the journey, some of the ways that you can work with us.
Hey, thanks for listening. It's Tess here. I know life's challenges can feel overwhelming, but through breathwork, there is a way to find clarity, release those stored emotions, and feel more at peace. I offer one-to-one group and online sessions, and I'm excited to share my upcoming digital breathwork audios, perfect for when you need support on the go or in your own time. So if this speaks to you, visit my website, tessrouse.com, or connect with me on socials at @HerUndearth. Let's breathe through it together.
Hi, friends. Christina here, helping you connect within yourself, develop your intuitive gifts, and tap into your deeper power and purpose is just some of the beautiful work I do with clients. I offer one-to-one deep dive soul coaching and one-to-one readings with your choice of an Akashic Record soul reading or an intuitive guidance session with Spirit. And if you're ready to go all in, I offer my Soul Empowered membership, which includes weekly live meetups, access to all of my online programs, my entire library of guided meditations, one-to-one support from me, as well as community connection with others on the soul journey. You can visit my website, rootsoflovecoaching.ca, or connect with me on my socials at christina.soulempowered. I can't wait to support you deeper on your path.
And now, back to the episode.
Yeah. And, in saying that, let's dive in. I mean, I could have talked about a lot of things, let's be honest. But one thing that I have been continually working on in my relationship with Derek is, it's so interesting. When I look back, I love a good pattern, right? When I look back on my relationships, I can see that in my marriage with Brad, there was a lot of energy that was similar to my dad's. So there was a lot of healing I did around that piece. Well, when I look at this relationship with Derek, there's a lot of energy that's similar with my mom. So that has been a big piece that I have been digging into with healing is the relationship with my mom. And, what's so interesting is that I remember growing up and I would talk so much about how I felt so much unconditional love from my mom and she would always have my back. And that was the truth. But then as I got older and in my healing, I could actually see that it was like a big lack of boundaries. And this is something that shows up with Derek is that sometimes he will really lack these boundaries for himself, with others, with me. And I really started to notice this feeling of, ugh, I don't like that. Ugh, right? Like literally that visceral feeling when like say I would do something in the relationship and I knew on a deeper level I needed a boundary there or like I should have been held accountable and he wouldn't. And then I'm like, ugh, Like, right? Or like with another person, I would see where he needed a boundary and he couldn't put that in there. Or with himself, maybe lacking a boundary. And listen, you guys, I've got all my own shit too. I'm not saying he's like, he has to, like,
Mm-hmm.
I also hold myself really accountable with things I have to work on. But for the sake of this conversation, this is something I noticed he would do. And it brought me the ick, the disgust. So I could have taken that at face value and been like, this is him, this is a him problem. And I think at first I did a little bit. Like I was like, oh, this is a you thing. And then as I dug into it, I could see that, oh wow, this energy really reminds me of my mom.
Ding, ding,
Ding,
ding.
ding, ding, right? But it didn't stop there, right? So it's one thing to then have the awareness, but you got to dig in. Like you got to, because otherwise, you guys, these patterns will continue to show up. It's just going to continue. It's like being in the hamster wheel. This is a song that doesn't end.
And can I just for a second, even if you choose that this partnership isn't the one for you, you will
Oh,
recreate that same dynamic in the next relationship. Okay. So if you don't stop, even in the same container, to figure out why the pattern, why the behavior, what can I shift in myself, it doesn't matter who it's with.
mm,
You are creating that external reality, that external relationship because your soul wants to heal it.
mhm. Yeah.
Sorry, continue.
Yeah. I mean,
Had to say that.
yes. And I think we even said that to each other on the voice note because you guys, Tess and I have the best voice notes. And I'll just be like, oh, it's just one of those days. And I'm like, no, but I know that like I got to learn this. I got to, truly, it is a cut. And we're going to explore this in our next podcast episode. It is a commitment to the work. Right. And showing up not just for your relationship, but for yourself and your healing. And so as I dug into this, and this is not really a big surprise, but I'm really starting to get more healing with this piece is that not only did my mom not have a lot of boundaries with us, like she let us do kind of whatever we wanted. There weren't a lot of boundaries. But what I also began to realize was after my parents' separation, it was a really, really tough, chaotic time. A lot of toxicity that was going on. My mom really struggled. She was really struggling on her own. And I could see her working so hard, putting all these other people's needs before her own. Like there were just no boundaries. The energy was so chaotic. And I watched her struggle through this and feel so out of control and just take on her experience. Take it on, take it on, take it on, no boundaries until I was forced to like just create these really intense boundaries for the rest of my life, which I'm now healing. But truly, like, so then when I did the work, I began to really see where this comes from. Right. And when Derek shows up without boundaries, it brings up that energy of mom having no boundaries and me feeling out of control. And then me having to literally push it away, repel it because it was too much for my little system to hold.
If we can pause right there, I just want everyone listening to see this. So, as Christina is little and mom doesn't have boundaries, Christina has no choice. In terms of a nervous system piece anyway here, she has to absorb those feelings. She doesn't have the cognitive development to say, oh, that's mom and she can be stressed because Christina actually depended on her for survival, just like we all do. Food, shelter, water, care, love, da 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 da. So how mom is, we will absorb that. And so you can see when this happens over and over again in a repeating cycle, we then take it and those little parts of us begin thinking the same thing. Like Christina's a grown woman. She's rebuilt her life all on her own. We all know that. But in those moments where, let's just say Derek doesn't show up with boundaries, the little girl inside of her is triggered and says, we are in danger here. We better get this under control. Like when you logically think about it, well, if Derek doesn't tell a customer off or whatever, doesn't have a boundary, like it's not going to be detrimental to her life. But in her body, in her nervous system, that's 100% what it means until she goes in and begins doing some healing work, some reprogramming with that inner child. So they realize we are not in the same predicament we were when we were little. We have different tools, right?
1000%. It's the
So that's
it's the energy, right?
yes, it
Yes.
reminds us that's what a frickin' trigger is, everyone.
Alert, alert. We know this energy. Alert.
This is why inner child healing, I know we sound like a broken record, but I swear, like Please do it. Your past is not in the past. It's inside of you, and it will get activated anytime that energetic trigger comes up. I promise you that. If there's anything you take away from today's podcast, just in that example alone, like you just did such a good job showing, like I can see little you in the same energy and then big you in the same energy, and how we carry that. Even though externally in our 3D world, we know consciously, logically, you're not in danger. Wild.
Yeah. And it also makes me think of, when we do think about what we needed then, this is where I am a true believer that it's not actually the things we experience, it's how we respond to them. That's what trauma is, right? It's when we can't
100%.
process it. Like, it would have been one thing for my mom to go through struggle, but to have been sturdy in her energy, to have been able to say, Mom's got this, I've got this, you're okay. And then to see her doing the things she was doing to make it by, she couldn't. And that's where we then are like, alert, this isn't safe. We're taking this on. We have to,
I love that. Yeah,
And
that's a great point.
And I think that's what I'm also learning. Like, if you're a parent that's listening, this is something I've also learned with the kids is like, I'm going to go through hard things. My job is not to not have them go through these things. It's showing them that, like, I've got this, using my words to say that. It's our words, it's our behavior, it's our energy, and doing the nervous system work so that they feel my grounded energy. So I wanted to say that because I think that's so important. When we go back and heal these pieces, we're not changing what happened, we're healing the energy. So now when I'm working with this piece, this is where it becomes so important. We do our inner healing, and then we come back and we communicate to our partner what's showing up. But then our partner also has the opportunity to shift theirs, to dig in, figure out why they're showing up in a certain way, and create their shifts. And this is where it becomes the dance.
You bring up this point too of just our expectation. I think if you go into relationship thinking it's supposed to feel smooth all the time and happy and joyful and playful, and then these things arise, that's also where resent comes up. Because again, rather than being like, oh, something I need to look at, growth opportunity, we think you created this to the partner.
Yeah.
And we're angry about it. Because also I think that that's a part of protection that comes up in us. We don't want to necessarily look at these painful pieces, right? So just know that if that is also a sentiment that you have towards your partner, that is most likely why.
Yeah. And truly, if we look at this from the lens of that we've called this in to heal, and I mean, that's not always easy when we're when we're in it. But I mean, one, you called this in to heal, and that's why it's showing up. And two, if you don't want to do it, it's going to show up again.
Yeah, wild. I think about when I'm triggered, I want everyone to know, and I've seen Christina do this as well, know that we aren't just like, I'm just going to go journal for a sec, figure out what this is about me. I'll be right back, hun. Like when I say, like, our parts inside of us, like those younger versions, they are ferocious sometimes. Like I'll be grinning through my teeth. Like, I just need a second.
Legitimate. Like, we were at somatic therapy, Derek and I, with our therapist last week. And I've been working with our therapist for quite a few years. And now she's started to do therapy for both of us together in a container. It's amazing. It's hard work, but it's amazing. The other session, I was in such a dysregulated place. She's like, what's going on? And I was like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. She's like, okay, why don't you just go take a walk? And I was like, oh, okay. And came back. And that's really good for, like, we have to be able to show our nervous system that we can create safety in those moments. We came back and, like, at some point, once I was regulated, we were kind of laughing about it. And she's like, oh yeah, that was a sticky energy we were working with there.
Yeah.
So shut down.
It's such a good example too, because it's not necessarily about the avoidance of triggers or that they don't happen anymore, that we don't get dysregulated. It's more, are we able to regulate? Do we have the tools? Do we have access to those tools to creating space and boundaries for ourselves to regulate, right? And then we can actually show up. So amazing. No, I love that. So much juiciness.
Girl, continual journey over here.
I hear that. When I think about my own journey with enmeshment, it's a wild ride, And I think, to be honest, I've really just figured this out this year. And I had a major sort of struggle this year, I'll say, or hardship that really got me to look at this. It's not that I haven't been willing to look at my triggers and all of that, but this enmeshment piece and this feeling of disgust. Christine, I think for you, that's probably been a more long-standing emotion just because of the lack of boundaries you obviously had in childhood with your mom. For me, it's more that I didn't realize how enmeshed I was with my partners. And this goes back well beyond Tori. Like, I was able to see this pattern this year, like those gosh darn patterns, I tell you, they're always revealing so much to us. Mine comes from this need for safety and security. So those are, I would say, two of my Mount Everest wounds. So safety, meaning like my physical body. So everyone knows my story, had to be super hyper vigilant with my mother because of the physical abuse that, sometimes she would have if she was in an emotionally dysregulated state. And so I learned to enmesh myself with her so that I could be hyper aware, hyper vigilant of how she was at all times. And then I would take on the responsibility of calming her emotions, making her feel happy, doing things to appease her so that I could shift her emotional experience. Because as a child in that predicament, it 100% had an impact on me. I had no other choice. I didn't get to create the boundary. The boundary was you either enmesh and regulate her emotions for her, or you are the collateral damage, if not, right? And so the other piece as well was always security. And so I think there was just a lot of money wounding that happened in my childhood just due to my parents both owning their own businesses, and times were tough and they were always so career driven. And so when things started to not go well, I felt like our lives were going to be over in a way. Like, there was very much that very fear-centered thinking. Like, I better go to college. I better get a really good job, or like my life's going to fall apart. And when I began looking at this piece this year, I realized that anytime a partner of mine began to feel sort of unstable in their career or their job, or even in college, like my ex, like I used to be like, hey, are you going to get that final assignment done? Like, you haven't gotten it done yet. Like, are you going to do it? And then I would just start doing it for them. Like, wild. Like, it was not my major, but you better believe, like, I would be like, yeah, just like, why don't you go clean the kitchen? I'll do this. Like, I had to take on the outcomes of their life because that's how vital to my own security and safety it felt. Wild. Because I think also one of the pieces was, once I estranged from my mom, like, her life literally went downhill in a real hot minute. Like, she lost her business, lost her house, all of these things. And I was like, that can never happen to me. And so almost from a different place, I had to enmesh for safety and security. But then I started creating that in all of my relationships up until this year. So I noticed this pattern begin again with Tori and I. We came up to Nelson to start this business. It didn't really work out. It was a big loss. Tori, kind of spiraled a bit. Obviously, that's a major blow to someone that kind of puts everything on the line. Anywho, Tori began to not really recover quite quickly enough for me. And I began to have all of those pieces show up that were so panicked. And I began to take on his emotional experience. Like, oh my gosh, you got to get a job. We got to figure this out. You got to get out of this, emotional place that you're in. Like, we got to go. And in a way, I was being pretty cruel, to be honest. I really felt like it was life or death. And I'm not saying that, obviously, when you're in an intimate partnership, you share a household and you have kids. Yeah, there is going to be an impact to you if someone's not doing well. But we all know that. But this was to another degree. And it took me about a month to realize, I was very dysregulated, and why, and how far back this wound really goes. And so I decided, no, this is where this ends with me. I need to unenmesh myself, untangle myself. Tori's emotional experience is his. I can be there for him, support him, but it's not my job to solve it. Tori will figure out his career and his purpose and his passion. I have figured out mine. I don't need to feel as though I don't, but that's what I was doing. I was beginning to take on his experience maybe more than he was. And so also in that, and this is sort of the tail end of it, one of the emotions that has shown up for me the most in relationships is resent. But it's because, again, I'm so enmeshed that I take on the responsibility, the emotional experience for my partners, and then I resent them for it. If anyone listening, know that that is because you are not creating the boundary and you are actually enabling the behavior. And so you are just as much to blame for it. And I can say that because like that was me. And like I'm still working through it. But it's funny because as a ending to the story, it has shifted so much in our relationship, me recognizing this wound, saying, no, we are not going to do this anymore. We are not going to be enmeshed in this. Your experience is yours. Your emotions are your own. And I'm not going to enable. He needs to rise up on his own. And guess what? He has. And he has learned so much in the process and become the person, like I think in some of those areas that I've been asking him to for a long, long time. But it took me stepping away from the steering wheel and actually creating that space for him to be able to step into that trigger, step into that wound of his own and make that change.
I mean, I have so many things to say about all of this, but I mean, one, it's so interesting how you said this piece of resent. And, you know, whenever resent is showing up, it's because we're not creating a boundary for ourselves. Isn't it interesting how if disgust is showing up, we need a boundary? If resent is showing up, we need a boundary. So I think that those are really important indicators, is like for you listening right now, wherever you have disgust showing up, wherever you have resent showing up, what boundary are you needing first and foremost? You know, the other thing I really want to point out here was, so as Tori was moving through this rock bottom, right, where things were falling apart for him internally, which I believe things have to sometimes for us to learn how to rebuild what's more authentic. And then you have this experience that you had as a young girl witnessing that happen to mom. How did you help yourself heal through those pieces? Like what are you seeing that you needed that has helped you now be able to like work with this reality?
Yeah. I think in a lot of our wounds, we come to this point where we say, I've had enough. I've had enough of going through the same pattern over and over and over again. So when I arrived at that place of awareness where I could see this happen in my previous marriage, this happened in other relationships with people close to me, I was like, oh my God, it's me. It's not that I keep choosing the wrong people. It's a part of me. So I think when you can, like, this is why I think digging into our trauma is really important. A lot of people are like, no, positive mindset, reprogramming, everything's great, call it in, visualize it. I think if you don't go back, you can't recognize and become aware, you become a prisoner of your own patterns. I'll say that again. You become a prisoner of your own patterns. And I realized I was. And so that was my, I'll do whatever it takes moment. And so what I would do is one, I had a long conversation with him, admitted where I could see I was at play here. But I also created a boundary with Tori in terms of like, you need to do this on your own. And I love you and I'm here for you, but I have to sit over here. So that means like, I'm not looking for jobs for you. I'm not applying for you. I'm not making your therapist appointments for you. You got to do it. I can't sit here and be like, I want you to be that masculine leader. And yet I'm just leading all the time because I'm too scared to let go of the wheel. So that looks like parts work. That looks like nervous system regulation when I would get activated. Even after I'd created the boundary, there were still days where I was like, oh my gosh, like, is he actually going to get out of this? Everything in me wanted to control the narrative, control the situation for him. I would go and do breath work. I would do some tapping. I would journal what was coming up. And literally, when I talk about reparenting, I like to close my eyes, visualize a little part inside of me that's obviously had an experience close to this and say, like, what do you need in this moment? And give that to them. And so as I began to do that and focus in my own lane to really begin to cut that cord of enmeshment, it just felt like Tori's experience was so separate from me. And I began, I think, for the first time in my life to feel the freedom of that, to not have to hold everything on my shoulders and like in my physical body. You know, I'm already a mother. I already have 2 children. You know, I still have to do that to an extent till they're a certain age. And I realized I was taking this on for a lot of the adults in my life.
You know, there's this aspect of surrender here. And I think sometimes I truly think surrender is necessary in any of these, like, whatever you want to call it. I jokingly say, like, come to Jesus moments where it's like,
take the wheel.
I am so done with this, right? But what we fail to remember sometimes with surrender is that we do get to control how we respond in supporting ourselves in the surrender.
Mm-hmm.
Doing the work, right? Regulating your nervous system, being that inner parent that the little you needed then when mom's life was falling apart and it felt so out of your control.
100%. Yeah, there was no safety and security given to me as a child. Like, hey, this is all going to work out. We're going to figure it out. None of that. And so I had to create that in my life, right? And so I just continued doing that. So 100%. And we have to realize now that the people we're in relationships with are adults and they can choose to create the life that they want or not. And then we have other choices, right?
Yes, that's it
So,
right there, right? Is that healing comes with choice.
mm,
That's where we heal because when we had trauma, we couldn't choose, like you said
I love
earlier.
that.
So, and as this one little piece before we move on, if something is continuing to show up again and again, this is your indicator it's a pattern. And if you're not shifting out of it, it means you haven't built enough awareness. So you
Mm,
have to keep digging. You have to keep
mhm,
figuring out, where does this come from? What feels familiar? What am I not seeing? What do I need to see more of? Like, dig.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, let's jump into that just to leave. Let's end off the podcast here with, what are some steps or some actions that you can take to begin going down this road of unenmeshment, we'll call it, and really recognizing where your conscious relationship is asking you to meet these triggers. I think, one you just said there was, if you are not aware, like one practice that is really, really powerful is when you're triggered, literally go and open a journal and say, like, what am I feeling right now? Okay. Do I recognize the same feeling from another experience or relationship in my life? And maybe you think back to the year prior, and then maybe you go back another 5 years and just begin almost like following like a flower down to the root. Keep going back until something hits and you're like, yes, that. Because you might be thinking, oh, I'm triggered in my romantic relationship, but it's not necessarily that same dynamic from the past. It could just be, dad treated me like that. Oh, this one time this thing happened. Wow. Because sometimes it's just a one-time experience and it is wild when you land on that and you're like, how did that create this nervous system reaction or this visceral piece within my body that I am still carrying 30, 40 years later? Like, it is wild.
Yeah, yeah. And so trailing it back, and I would also say too, as another thing is if you can have awareness of your nervous system, like we can't actually do any work when we're dysregulated. We're in this
Mhm.
very contracted state. You can't do very much when you're so contracted because all of your protective mechanisms will be showing up. You will be shut down, whether this is
Mhm.
fight flight, where you're wanting to fight someone, or you're wanting to run, or you're shut down and freeze, and parts of your brain are not online. Also, recognizing that when a trigger is showing up, one of the most important things you can do is find regulation in your system.
Yeah, absolutely. And that could be in multiple ways for you. Maybe that's taking a bath, getting out in nature. Maybe it's some sort of breath work or tapping. Maybe it's dancing around. Like a lot of it, usually nervous system regulation, I'd say if you're not familiar with that, start with something physical in your body. Like move your body. Like there's such a charge in your energy. You're so activated. And again, the body can heal itself. I promise you all that. But typically we don't. We just start doom scrolling on a phone or something like that, which doesn't actually allow the body to release that charge of energy that we need to come off that kind of high, if you will, that cortisol rush.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe just lastly too, like try setting a small boundary. If you feel that you're enmeshed with someone, that whole piece around, is it guilt or is it emotional absorption? Really try to see, can I say the thing that I really want to say again with kindness? And even if that person reacts, maybe this is your mother even. Maybe it's not your intimate partnership. Any kind of, very deep relationship that you have. Can I do that and be okay and surrender to however they react? And can I stay in my own body? This could be as much as, no, we're not going to come over for Sunday dinner because we're just really busy and the kids need a break. Like there are people that will just go because they're so afraid of the reaction. They feel guilty, but it's not guilt. You're taking on that experience of someone else. And guess who gets sacrificed in the process? You do. right?
And it's funny as I'm listening to you here, for me, and we've explored this a lot, it's not saying the thing that's hard for me. It's actually taking a little bit of time to say it in like a regulated way.
Well, that's because you, though, come from a wound of no boundaries.
Mhm.
And so you learn very quickly, we got to make a lot of them. Whereas I never could make a boundary or my physical body would be harmed. So wild that, yeah, exactly. This is why it's just so important to understand your experience. It's not for blame. It's just to create awareness so that you can decide, do I want to keep having these patterns and reactions to things, or do I want to leave some of these and change them into the life that I want to create?
Mm,
That's all it is.
Preach, girl. Preach.
Yeah.
Let's change those patterns.
Let's get some shirts made.
Yeah, changing patterns.
One trigger at a time.
Breaking cycles, changing patterns. I like it.
I hope everyone listening enjoyed this podcast. By the way, quick new announcement. Christina and I's podcast is going to be on YouTube. We have a page. It's Authentically Wild. We're just getting all the episodes on there. So we just started recording video this year. So if you want to watch it on there or Spotify, those are the two platforms you can see it. And please share this podcast episode if it would help anyone you know.
Yay. Thank you, my friends. We hope you have the best day, and we will see you guys next week.